All right, welcome back. This is part three of the itemized deduction discussion. We just left off with charitable contributions, and now I'm going to move on to casualty losses. So, casualty and theft losses. I guess the theft part of it's pretty obvious. Your stuff gets stolen, then any amount that you're kind of left holding on to that's not paid for by insurance, and that is not then limited by some rules I'm going to get into shortly. You potentially, if there's something left over from that you incurred this loss, you might be able to deduct it. The casualty end, the rules are going to work the same as if we have a theft, but casualty here in this sense usually means something kind of like an act of God. It's when there's a massive storm or a fire or something like that, where it's totally out of your control, and usually the examples you see are going to be something that's kind of weather related in that sense. Flooding, the list goes on and on. Getting into the deduction itself, there's a little bit of math that we have to do, just kind of pulling out of the facts that were given. The tax loss, meaning the amount that we could potentially deduct, it's again going to be one of these lesser of tests. So we're looking for the lesser of the decline in the value of the property or repair cost that's caused by this casualty. And what that means there is, like if we have a car or something and we total it, then our decline in value is really the entire value, because when it's totaled, it's worth zero. The repair cost part of it means, say we've got this same car, we take it to a body shop after this casualty loss, and it cost us $10,000 to fix it, to put it back in the same condition that it was in before the casualty. That repair cost, then, that $10,000 that I mentioned, becomes the decline in the value of the property. So the loss basically is the amount that it would take to get you back to the same position you were in before the casualty. So that's the first item we consider, but again, this is a lesser of test, so we look first at the decline in value or the repair cost. The second thing that we consider is our basis in that asset that was damaged or stolen. So if we had a huge decline in value, we had something that was worth a lot of money and it got damaged in a storm or something to that effect and was worth nothing, but we only paid a very little bit for it in the first place, the tax code really isn't going to help us out. We're not going to get to recoup that huge loss in fair market value through taxes if we didn't really pay anything for that asset to begin with. So it's a little bit of a benefit through the tax code for this stuff, but really what it gets down to is the IRS expects you to be insured for things that you own that are worth a lot of money. They're not going to provide that insurance by allowing really big itemized deductions. This last subpoint on this slide just means that, like with all the other stuff we've talked about, medical, and some other things that we'll get into at the end of this chapter, we're always talking about the amount we're out of pocket after we get paid back by other parties. So if we have an insurance policy on this asset and insurance pays us for part of the damages we had from a casualty or a theft, we're not then going to take that same amount that we've already been paid back and try and deduct it for taxes. That would be sort of double dipping. Instead, it's that net that we're still out of pocket that we're considering, that we're trying to deduct as a casualty or theft loss. So the limitations for casualty losses, there's actually two of them. There's one that you apply to each event. So if you have 3 different casualties during the year, you'll apply this first floor 3 times. The second floor is applied to the sum of all those casualties for the whole year. So that second test, you'll just do it once at the end of the year. So the first floor is your loss, your out-of-pocket amount. In order to have any kind of deduction, it needs to be more than $100 per casualty. So if you're out $10, the IRS says, well, it sucks to be you. Your deduction is 0. So you've got to, each accident, casualty, theft, whatever it is that you have, has to cost you more than $100 to even qualify for this type of treatment. So, assuming all of your events during the year meet this $100 threshold, you then add them all together and you only get to deduct what total loss you have that is more than 10% of your AGI. So I said the medical one was really hard to meet because it's 7.5% of AGI limitation. This one's even worse. I would say this one just doesn't come up as often in practice because by the time you're already talking about a casualty, I mean, those are pretty rare events. So medical, you'll see people face that limitation more in practice, but the casualty, it is an actual higher threshold. So what's important about this 10% is essentially we've had to already look at each of the events we have. We figure out what we're out of pocket for each of those. We then cut off $100 for each of those accidents. And then whatever is still out of pocket to us after all that, we compare it to 10% of our AGI. So it's really hard to take a casualty or theft loss deduction on a 1040 in general. It's got to be a really big ticket item that for some reason you don't have insured, which probably isn't that smart to begin with. So real quick, going back to this Excel file, I can show you a formula that kind of speaks to the same thing. This casualty loss limitation, take all of your casualty losses and add them together. So this is initially what you're out of pocket. Take off from that everything that you get paid back by insurance. So our net out of pocket. Then take off $100 times the number of casualties you had. So if you only have one casualty the whole year, this amount here just becomes $100. But if, like I was saying before, you had 3 during the year, then this becomes first adding all of the losses from those 3 accidents, taking out all of the reimbursement from those 3 accidents, and then cut off $300. Whatever's left after all of that, you got to hope that it's more than 10% of AGI. If it's not, then we just wind up going through all of that for nothing and our deduction becomes 0. So basically these last 2 pieces here are those 2 floor limitations that I talked about. First, it's $100 per accident, and then after you've done all that, add them all together and hope that you've got something left that's over and above 10% of AGI. If you do, that's the piece you get to deduct. Otherwise, if you come up less than this 10%, then you just wind up paying for those casualty losses yourself. The government's position is, well, you should have had insurance, and it would have come out of here, and you would have got paid back by someone else. All right, so getting back into the slides, we've got, aside from casualty, well, we can do a real quick example that basically speaks to the same stuff I just said. Sam had a car accident. The car was totaled. How much is Sam's casualty loss with the following facts? So we said initially this car was totaled and its original cost was 30 grand. But when the accident actually occurred, it was worth 15 grand. So our fair market value, what decline in value we had on the day of the accident was really 15. We went from having a car that was worth 15, we had an accident, and now it's worth nothing. So there's our loss there. We received insurance proceeds of $8,000, and then we've got this AGI number. So real quick, we can deal with those numbers in Excel. So just remember first, fair market value 15, insurance proceeds of 8, and then AGI of 50. So going over here to Excel, we said fair market value 15,000. Our insurance was 8,000. So our loss initially is going to be 7,000. Just 15 that we lost in total, but we got 8 of it back. So here's our initial loss. We then can apply our first threshold. So just take off $100. So initially our loss is going to be 6,900. So then we need to know what our AGI was, and I said that that was 50,000. So 10% of that is going to be $5,000. All right, so now we're comparing our loss after that first $100 floor of $6,900 to 10% of our AGI. So the IRS just says we're on the hook for this 10% of AGI no matter what. So really our deduction then winds up being the difference here. So it's going to be $1,900. And really that's all we have to do. Going back to the slides real quick, there's this other question here where we're just changing the facts slightly, and we're saying instead of having that car be totaled at the time of the accident, what happens if it can be repaired for $10,000? So going back to Excel real quick, we'll call this total example. And here, if we can repair it, then really what we have down here is the decline in value. Instead of 15, it wasn't totaled. It was actually only damaged by an amount of $10,000. That was what it cost us to get it back into working order. Everything else is going to be the same. So our $8,000 of insurance proceeds, we didn't change that. So really our initial loss is now only $2,000. We still have to apply that $100 floor, and it's looking like our initial loss is only going to be $1,900. AGI is unchanged, so the IRS says we're still on the hook for $5,000 based on our AGI. Therefore, our deduction is just going to be zero. We don't have enough of a loss up here, thanks to insurance, really. We just don't have enough to get over this 10% of AGI mark, so we're left with nothing to deduct. The good news is, though, we had insurance, so we really didn't lose all that much, at least compared to the previous example. Really what we get from this previous example is that this person was just really underinsured. So the big story to take away from this casualty loss stuff is buy insurance. Don't rely on your taxes to take care of losses you might have on assets that really mean something to you. All right, so with that, we're going to jump into more miscellaneous itemized deductions in the next installment.